Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. It's great to see you. That is the Nigun for Shabbos Kodesh. Shabbos Kodesh, if you're familiar with it, it's one of my favorites. And that is because today, my suggestion is one of the 10 greatest Jewish ideas for the world is actually Shabbos. Shabbos is one of the 10 greatest contributions that Judaism has to offer to the world. And we will dive into that. But first, a poll question for each of you. Here is a question for you. Is Shabbat primarily, option 1, a key for Jewish survival? Option 2, a universalistic ethical message? Option 3, fun. Of course, we might want to choose multiple of those, but if you had to pick one of those, what do you think it primarily is? Okay, very interesting. 33% here suggest it's a key for Jewish survival. 67% suggest a universalistic ethical message. And no one here said fun, although I'm sure, Shabbat can be more fun than going to a Suns game or actually the Suns aren't so fun right now, but you get the point. In any case, friends, let's dive in here together. We have a lot to cover, and I'm looking forward to learning from you after I share some ideas. So here we're going to explore the wondrous Jewish idea of Shabbat, the day of rest, one day a week, when we are taught not to be productive, to desist from creative acts. We have space to be in community, to pray, to enjoy food, learning, and most of all, to rest. We can start by reading this essay by Chaim Nachman Bialik, the great Hebraist and writer of the 19th and 20th centuries. This is from his essay Halakha ve'Agadah, in which he discusses how the work of halakha, the legal framework of Judaism, is as creative an act as any other art. The medium of halakha, Bialik says, is life, human, communal, and national life. To demonstrate this point, Bialik writes, by the way, he is a distant relative, not so distant, but he is related to Mayim Bialik, the actress in LA today. The children of Israel, this is kind of a long quote, so I hope you can bear with me, but you can read along with me if you want. The children of Israel has its own magnificent creation, a lofty, holy day, Queen Shabbat. In the imagination of the nation, it has developed into a living being with a form and a body, all radiance and beauty. She is the Shabbat that God brought into God's world at the close of the act of creation, so that the painted and polished marriage canopy would not lack a bride. It was she who was God's dear treasure in God's storehouse, for whom God found no other partner than Israel. According to a different folk legend, she sits like a princess, like a bride set among her maidens, concealed in a sanctuary in the Garden of Eden within 7 chambers, and her 6 maids, the 6 days of creation, attend to her. When she enters the city, all turn their faces toward the door and receive her appearance with a blessing. Boi kala, come, O bride, the Queen Shabbat. And the pious go out to receive her in the field. Once she also came in a dream to Ibn Ezra, and she was in low spirits and sad, and she sent a letter by his hand to her partner Israel. This is the famous Sabbath epistle. All the poets of Israel, from Rav Yehuda Halevi to Hain, sang her their songs and melodies. Is she not a creature all of Agadah, of legend, of tale? Is she not herself a source of life and sanctity to an entire nation, and a wellspring flowing with divine inspiration for poets and liturgists? And even so, who will ascertain by whose hand she was crafted? Who made her into what she is? Was it by the hand of the halakha, by the law, or by the hand of Agadah, by the hand of legend? Tractate Shabbat has 157 double pages, and Tractate Eruvin has 105, and they are almost entirely devoid of Agadah, right, of legends, of stories. They mostly comprise of examinations and precise legal analyses into the 39 labors and their subcategories and the fixing of domains. With what does one light? With what does an owl? With what does an animal go out? How does one communalize a domain? How exhausting to the spirit! How much acuity wasted on every little sense. And what I traverse among those pages and see groups upon groups of sages and scholars at their work, I say, indeed, artists of life I see before me. Artists of life in the workshop and at the potter's wheel. Tremendous spiritual work like this. At the same time, like an ant and like a giant, work for its own sake, born of love and faith without bounds, is impossible without divine inspiration. Each of those individuals did their part according to their character and their soul's inclinations. And all of them together were beholden to an exalted will that ruled over them. This is nothing but a single lofty ideal, single elevated image of Shabbat floating before the eyes of these exceptional people. And her spirit is what gathered them here from all the generations and made them into collaborators, into her creation and enhancement. Every matkif he challenged, every or minhu, they brought a counter source. Every barrier and every fence is nothing but a new illuminative ornament, an additional embellishment of the same shape, necessary ornaments and embellishments, because without them, she won't become what she needs to be. And what is the fruit of all the laborious work of halakha, of law? A day that is all agadah, all legend. So I love this thought by Bialik, because he says, look, if you look at a painting and you see all the attention given to each image in the painting, he says, all the more so with the hundreds of pages of Talmud that the rabbis engaged with every facet of life and how we might relate to it 6 days of the week and how we might relate to it on that seventh day. Some of you were with us when we did the 39 class series on the 39 malachot, where we explored exactly this idea, how each of these creative acts opens up a whole new spiritual reality and moral reality with how we relate to creation. And so too, if someone just says, oh, Shabbat, I like challah, or oh, Shabbat, I like the melodies, he's saying we have missed so much of the thousands of pieces of nuance of the artists, of the sages of the Talmud have offered us for how we might relate to this day. Bialik writes beautifully of how the fine scale details of the law form the magisterial, metaphorical being of Shabbat. With that framing in mind, we can turn our focus to the scales in which those two extremes engage. What values does Shabbat teach us? How does Shabbat change our experience of the world? How does it change who we are and what the world is? We're going to explore 4 principles we learn from Shabbat, each of which also appear in other ways in our tradition. Number 1, care for the other, especially the laborer. Number 2, care for animals. Number 3, care for the earth. And number 4, care for ourselves. The first ethical lesson we learn from the institution of Shabbat is the importance of labor rights. In the 10 Commandments, we read, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Shabbat for your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or your female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. This commitment to a worker's rights, free time, to leisure, and to rest, is a direct response historically to the forced labor in Egyptian slavery. As the following verse says, remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. I want to remind us that labor law in America, that a worker in America has only one, that has a day, the right to a day off of work each week, is only like 100 years old. I mean, America, the pinnacle of progress in the world, about 100 years old, that a worker gets the day off. By the way, for Pesach, I was in Teaneck, New Jersey, and in Bergen County, what do you call it? Blue laws? It's called blue laws? The notion that most retail stores are closed on Sundays, actually, in line with this biblical ideal. Is it called blue laws? Someone correct me if I got that wrong. But anyways, this notion of closing. But this is very new in modernity, but 3,300 years old, or however we want to date that, years old, the notion that every person gets a day off of work. Shabbat is not only the commandment that teaches and enforces labor rights. There's also mitzvot about paying workers promptly, as in Parshat Ki Tetzei, where we read, "You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of your communities." Right? This is known as oshek. Oshek means you're not paying workers on time. You must pay out the wages due on the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it. Else a cry to God will be issued against you, and you will incur guilt. We see in Devarim 24. Thanks, Judy. The phrase here translated as, "for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it," can also be translated as, "for he sets his soul upon it." And the Talmud expands on this teaching that one who withholds the wages of a hired laborer, it's as though he takes his soul from him. Rav Huna and Rav Chizda disagreed over the meaning of that statement. Take the soul from the laborer. One says it's referring to the soul of the robber, and one says it refers to the soul of the robbery victim. According to those two sages, Rav Huna and Rav Chizda, exploitative labor relations degrade the humanity of both the exploiter and the exploited. Contemporary New York City-based researcher, educator, and organizer Avi Gerlich has published an article, "The Fight for the Sabbath in Jewish Currents," which chronicles the history of the U.S. labor rights movement and its relationship to Shabbat. In particular, he tells the story of Rabbi Bernard Druchman, who was a rabbi in the U.S. in the early 20th century. Druchman was committed to traditional life and also to the reality of living in the modern world. His efforts to ensure Jews to the ability to observe Shabbat in the predominantly Christian U.S. ultimately made him an ally of labor organizers and a leader in the fight for the 2-day weekend and 40-hour work week. Gerlich concludes his detailed, mostly historical essay by looking at the present and towards the future. Here's what he writes. But utopian visions for a progressively shorter work week have since faded away. The fight for the shortening of working hours plateaued after World War II, and today's workers, many juggling multiple jobs, are lucky to get 2 full days off per week. Dawn has not broken onto an advanced society of abundance and leisure. And while many Jews today are privileged to enjoy the Sabbath, we regard our observance as a matter of personal choice, without aspiring to make it more accessible to others. Who is prepared to fight for Shabbos as a right to join a broad workers' coalition for more leisure and time for ourselves? Can a new Sabbath alliance emerge? By the way, it's worth a reminder that Israelis typically work a 5.5-day work week, or 6. Sunday is a school day. Sunday is a work day. Friday is a full work day for many, or a half work day or 3/4 work day for others. But there, the Sabbath is your day off. And then you have a 6-day work week. Americans who are privileged enough to have a 5-day work week, many of course have 6, or may even find a way to have a 7, are in a different situation. And then of course there's Europe, around earlier retirements, mandated retirements. Israel also sometimes does that. The inability to even work for overtime in some places. Our modern society desperately needs to continue reevaluating our understanding of the purpose and balance of labor and leisure. The Shabbat Queen has so much to teach us about workers' rights, non-exploitative productivity, and just equitable life and community if we listen to her. The next ethical lesson we can learn from Shabbat after labor rights is about the protection of animal welfare. Animals don't tend to do farming labor on their own, so prohibiting people from working would automatically mean the animals won't work either. And yet the Torah explicitly mentions in the verse we read a moment ago that animals must rest from labor as well. Even bothering to list out your ox, your ass, or any of your cattle, it goes that specific. You can hear a similar verse quoted in Kiddush on Shabbat morning. But the 7th day is a Sabbath of your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. Even as we sanctify the day at our festive Shabbat table, we remember that the day of rest is not only for humans, but also for the animals we are in relationship with. While they're not considered equal to us, they do have some level, as they don't have human dignity. Shabbat reminds us to see them as more than purely instrumental, to respect the animals' lives as inherently valuable, to know that animals like us have the capacity for exhaustion and suffering, and they deserve to be protected by the divine law from the misery. The 18th century Italian rabbi Moses Chaim Luzzatto, known as the Ramchal, writes about kindness in his classic Musar work of ethical teachings, the Mesilas Yesharim, the Mesilat Yesharim. Included in this matter is to not cause pain to any creature, even animals, and to show mercy and concern towards them. Likewise, Scripture states, the righteous person knows the soul of their beast. And according to some of our sages, to cause pain to an animal is a biblical prohibition, while to others, it's at least a rabbinical prohibition. The general principle of the matter is that mercy and benevolence must be permanently fixed in the heart of the pious person, and that their aspiration is always to bring contentment to their fellow creatures and not cause them any pain. By the way, I'm sometime in a little tension between, I was mentioning this to some, talking to VBM staff about this yesterday, tension between animal rights activists and progressive criminal justice rights activists around whether it should be a felony to engage in animal cruelty. And animal rights activists want to see more felonies for horrific animal cruelty. And criminal justice advocates want there to be less criminalization and want there to be less felonies. And so there's a little bit of a war among those two progressive camps. I sympathize with both, but here I lean more towards the animal rights activists, that if someone is throwing their dog out a window or lighting their dog on fire or just stabbing horses or just doing, putting their cat on fire, right? That these are things that are likely to lead towards human cruelty as well, and themselves, ought to be, taken seriously, even though I'm opposed to, our mass incarceration system being out of control. Anyways, besides human labor and animal labor, Shabbat is also a time where we don't work the land, perhaps not only for our sake, but for the sake of the land itself. In the creation story at the beginning of Genesis, when God is finishing the creation of the natural world and creates humanity, God gives all of the rest of creation into the control of humanity. And in the second chapter, when the creation is retold somewhat differently, the Torah clarifies what that giving really means by saying that God placed Adam and Chava in the garden, la'ovda u'leshomra, in order to till it and to tend to it, to work it and protect it, or to serve it and to keep it, based on various translations. One of our very first charges as humanity is to steward the land, to protect it, to reap from it, and to eat from it also, but to make sure it's healthy and cared for. That is our fundamental role. The Shabbat rest is part of that. And also the sabbatical year, which is like Shabbat, but on a longer time scale. Every seventh year, not only every seventh day, the land is to rest and recover from being worked and from the demands of productivity. Let me actually reflect on that for a moment, because when I was in Israel for a sabbatical year on a few occasions, you'll notice these signs up in all the stores, like fruits and vegetable stands, around how they're selling fruit and vegetables. Because there's a big machloket, there's a big debate in Israel today among the observant populations as to how to embrace the sabbatical year. And this is actually a great exercise in kind of the plurality of values among the tradition. Some people prioritize the land in the sabbatical year. So what does that mean? It means don't work the land in the sabbatical year. So where do you buy your food then? You buy it from Mitzrayim. You buy it from Egypt, for example. And there in the fruit stand, you'll see a sign that says, our fruit and vegetables are Mitzri. They're Egyptian. Others don't prioritize the land. They prioritize the Jewish worker. So how do you prioritize the Jewish worker? You find a way for them to still work and still benefit. So what does that look like? For example, you can do farming that is above ground. They have these new technologies where you're still farming, but it's not directly into the earth. Some also want to prioritize Jewish owners. And here there's actually an interesting partnership with Palestinians, whether they're Arab Israelis or Palestinians, where what do? You sell the land for the year to Arabs. And Arabs get to benefit from selling that produce to Israelis. And Israelis get to benefit in that they don't lose their money for the year. They don't have to close up shop for a year. They benefit from selling it to the Arabs to work the land, and the Israeli farm owner gets the benefit from the sale. And so that's kind of a win-win if you want to benefit kind of the Arab and the Israeli over the land. Then there's a few other approaches as well. But if you're interested in that, we can come back to that in our conversation. So do you prioritize the Israeli landowner? Do you prioritize the land? There's a few other approaches that are taken as well. We can come back to. But anyways, so we've discussed Shabbat's role as a day of rest for the human laborer, for the animal, and for the earth. The fourth lesson from Shabbat is to circle it back to humans, but think of ourselves, not as simply laborers who desist from labor on Shabbat. 20th century theologian Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his classic English language work, the Shabbat, writes, and by the way, I assume everyone has read this book, but if you haven't, it's a very quick read and worth the read. And if you haven't read it in over a decade, it's worth returning to. It's one of Heschel's finest works. He writes, when the Romans met the Jews and noticed their strict adherence to the law of abstaining from labor on the Sabbath, their only reaction was contempt. The Sabbath is a sign of Jewish indolence, was the opinion held by Juvenal, Seneca, and others. Right? The Romans thought the Shabbos meant Jews are lazy. Right? We're the Romans. We're industrial. We work hard. We build bridges, and we're the masters of society. Right? These lazy Jews. Heschel goes on. In defense of the Sabbath, Philo, the spokesman of the Greek-speaking Jews of Alexandria, says, on this day we are commanded to abstain from all work, not because the law inculcates slackness. Its object is rather to give man relaxation from continuous and unending toil, and by refreshing their bodies with a regularly calculated system of remissions, to send them out renewed to their old activities. But Heschel rejects Philo's defense of Shabbat. And he says, here the Sabbath is represented not in the spirit of the Bible, but in the spirit of Aristotle. According to the Stagirite, we need relaxation because we cannot work continuously. Relaxation, then, is not an end in itself. It is for the sake of activity, for the sake of gaining strength for new efforts. To the biblical mind, however, labor is the means toward an end. And the Sabbath as a day of rest, as a day of abstaining from toil, is not the purpose of recovering one's lost strength and becoming fit for the forthcoming labor. The Sabbath is a day for the sake of life. Man is not a beast of burden, and the Sabbath is not for the purpose of enhancing the efficiency of the world. Last in creation, first in intention, the Sabbath is the end of the creation of heaven and earth. The Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays. The weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It's not an interlude, but the climax of living. The Midrashic work, Shemot Rabbah, tells a story that is relevant to Heschel's teaching. When Moses went out and saw the Hebrew slaves, he saw that they had no respite. He went and said to Pharaoh, one who has a slave, if he does not rest one day a week, he will die. These are your slaves. If you do not allow them to rest one day a week, they will die. He said to him, go and do with them whatever you say. Moses went and instituted the day of Shabbat for rest. Right? Obviously, that's not Pshat, but that's the Midrash over there. Going back to Gerlich, in his article on the Shabbat labor movement, he refers to the conception of Shabbat presented in this Midrash as Pharaoh's Shabbat, to refresh an enslaved people for another week of slavery. As he says, this is in contrast to God's Shabbat, to our Shabbat, which is not there to make the worker as a productive worker. Rather, it's a splendiferous day of its own inherent holiness, the partner of a people with inherent value, holiness, and dignity. Tricia Hersey, who is a contemporary activist, performance artist, and poet, and the founder of the NAP ministry, in her book, Rest is Resistance, a manifesto, Hersey teaches that rest is part of liberation. She writes, we are resting not to do more and to come back stronger and more productive for a capitalist system. Rest is not a luxury or a privilege. This lie has been drilled into our brains and minds forever, and it's time to begin to remove this veil. The deepest movement of your deprogramming pilgrimage will not be unraveling from this false belief. One day will be the unraveling from this false belief. One day, I hope we can all deprogram from the lie that rest, silence, and pausing is a luxury and privilege. It's not. The systems manipulated you to believe it's true. The systems have been lying and guiding us all blindly to urgent and unsustainable fantasies. We've replaced our inherent self-esteem with toxic productivity. When we finally realize that a long checklist of to-dos will not replace a deep understanding of our enoughness, we will start the unlearning and unraveling process. You don't have to always be creating, doing, and contributing to the world. Your birth grants you rest and leisure as well. Friends, to move to a conclusion here, Shabbat is a lesson in human dignity, an insistent reminder of your infinite worth as you are, just for being you. The sages of the Talmud teach that Shabbat is 1/60th part of the world to come. That is Me'ein Olam Haba, from the stuff of the world to come. And conversely, that the Messianic era is Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a day that is entirely Shabbat. My dear teacher, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, taught me the value of immersing myself in an illusion of what the world could look like. You don't stay there forever in that illusion. But having time in this idealized, pretend reality helps me hold on to the vision of what I aspire to when I'm back in the mess of reality. That's what Shabbat offers us, a taste of an egalitarian, messianic utopia without exploitation of other humans, of animals, of land, or of ourselves. One day out of every 7, we can immerse ourselves in that 1/60th of what the world could be, and then bring that vision with us in the other 6 days and in our work of bringing the world closer to that ideal. Okay, dear friends, I would love to open our conversation. I see a few friends have to leave early. Totally understandable. I would love to hear from you. By the way, I think this approach also is true in itself, but I think it's also a great approach to bring progressive and more secular Jews back into an interest of Shabbat. This is not just, oh, the Torah says Shabbat, or your grandparents kept Shabbat, so you should honor it also. This is actually a progressive vehicle towards the repair of society.
David Newman. So my first thought is that I should have written fun. Nobody voted for fun. But number one, it is fun. And number two, I really, I don't go to synagogue every Shabbat. I'm a Reformed Jew, but when I do, I just come out feeling so good and cleansed and peaceful, and all of my troubles seem to not be so present at that moment. So it's good for me to go, and I really like it when I go.
Love that. Thank you, David, for sharing that. And while I want to support what you say, although I may be less of a synagogue goer than you, and I don't mean my comment to be an attack on synagogues. I do believe that the Jewish approach is that the home is more central to the Shabbat experience than synagogue. And one of my protests against the synagogue institution is that there's been an attempt to demonstrate that Shabbat experience is primarily a synagogue experience. That you want to engage in Shabbat, then we should go to synagogue, right? And I think that's wonderful and beautiful. But I do think the Shabbat home table is the central Jewish institution for Shabbat. And so that is not as easy to produce because we might not have a choir or a cantor or a sermon or a whole community there. But my hope is that in part of the renaissance of the institution of the enterprise of Shabbat is that with the growth of Friday night attendance of services in the Reform world or of Shabbat morning, those who go there, that there can also be a renaissance of the family experience, the communal experience of hosting at the table. So anyways, David, thank you for that. And push back if you disagree. If you want to make the case that the synagogue should be more central than the home for Shabbat, I'd love to hear that argument too.
I think for people who live by themselves or who don't have a lot of family, the togetherness is the important part, not the location.
Right. Yes, good. Yeah, but I wonder how we can rebuild a culture of hosting. So I agree with that many people are isolated, and being a synagogue is a chance for community and for connection, and I love that. And I wonder if it can also go beyond into the home as well. Hi, Cheryl. Thanks for that, Judy.
Good morning.
Hi. Morning.
Shabbat is longer than just a meal at Friday night or attending services on Saturday morning. And Stan and I are regular synagogue attendees. There's our community. There's 60 about, give or take, of people who we can count on seeing every week, and that's part of Shabbat too. And, it just goes along. I mean, everyone here who said anything is right. It's how you perceive Shabbat, how you bring Shabbat to yourself. And if it's hosting or attending, love doing both, or attending services or attending somebody else's Shabbat dinner or hosting our own. That's great because Shabbat's longer than just those couple of hours of doing the one or the other.
Okay, very nice. Thank you so much. I think that's so important. Rabbi Chaim, if anyone attended his session a few days ago, argued against the idea of safe spaces on campus. He said, obviously people need physically safe spaces, but he said, going to college is not about having safe spaces. It's about confronting unsafe ideas. And I appreciate that idea, but for adults post-college, in sometimes what's experienced as a hostile world, it's so important to have safe spaces, and I think one of them can be the weekly attendance at a shul, at a temple, to go to a place where one feels the love of community, one feels they can take down their guard a little bit. And one population I want to amplify right now in that regard is the queer community. I was just reading an article this morning in E-Jewish Philanthropy that talked about how queer Jews who were often finding refuge in queer spaces are finding queer spaces to be more hostile to Jews post-October 7th and are needing Jewish community to be all the more welcoming to them right now, given kind of what they're experiencing. Of course, not every queer space is anti-Semitic. That would be wrong. But the growing sense that those are hostile spaces for them means that needs to be, a space of all the more so a space of welcome. And that's true for many other groups who are marginalized as well, of course. So anyways, thank you for that, Cheryl and Judy, that reminder of community and connection in a world where we need that all the more than ever, and as communities are breaking down in America. Yes, Agalea and then Cindy.
Okay, so just to throw this out there, okay, that's why I said depends on what you mean by home. Okay, I'm more or less isolated here in Louisiana anyway, though. But I don't know. For me, though, it might feel more like home if I'm out and on Shabbat and basically just chilling out and taking pictures of peacocks or and I know that I'm not supposed to be taking pictures of peacocks. I'm sorry, okay, but anyway, though, but it still feels like a home, like I'm out in the middle of the a natural setting and everything like that, and it just feels great. Or I'm petting kittens or something like that, though. So I don't know if that helps anyone, though, but home can mean a lot of different things. So yeah.
Aglaya, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, in terms of what home means for us. And it's funny. I just before this class got an email from a veterinarian trying to figure out how to, navigate Shabbat experience being a vet. And, do we treat urgencies with animals the same as we do with urgencies with humans? And I was thinking about that this weekend also, because just before Shabbat, an 80-pound tortoise was walking down our road, and we rescued the tortoise and brought the tortoise into our backyard, and our kids named him Mikey for Michelangelo, the Ninja Turtle. We found out, and then we put signs all over the neighborhood and found out that actually it's a girl, and her name is Tess. He's quite offended to be known as a Ninja Turtle. And if you saw my post on this, I saw a nice Torah that said that one thing we can learn from turtles is that turtles don't fight back. What do they do when they're under attack? They hide in their shell. And of course, there's a place in the world to fight back and defend ourselves. There's another place when we're offended to not seek out fighting back, but to retreat into the shell, and to have the wisdom to know when to defend ourselves and when somebody offends us or hurts us, to just build enough protective shell that we can kind of hide away for a little bit and then brush it off, and not be over the prohibition in the Torah of seeking revenge. Some Jews today are very into revenge. We have to make sure we never fall into that trap of seeking revenge and calling that out. These are difficult days right now as we're seeking, ceasefire deals. And, without taking a stand on that, unless people want to get into that, whatever is guiding us, we need to be sure it's not revenge, but whatever is ultimately justice as we see it. In any case, thank you, Aglaia, for that, about thinking about home. And home is such a complicated idea. For some of us, home will always be that house we grew up in with our parents. It'll always be that hometown. For some of us, home is the home we live in now. For others, home is a spiritual idea. There's a homecoming that we can go to internally. And for others, it's out in nature. So I appreciate that, Aglaia. So much more to say about that. But Cindy, over to you, Cindy, and then Stan. Cindy, and then Stan.
So I was thinking of the concept of social orthodoxy. And what I've been seeing in a number of schools, including our school here in Milwaukee, is that the young people, and young people who are day school graduates, so these are not, uneducated people, come to shul, but they're mostly in the basement with their kids and their friends, and they're not up davening. So shul is still the place they go to on Shabbos, but it's not about religion so much. It's the community.
Yeah.
And I would bet, I've spoken to a few of them, that they don't even, they're all very well educated, and they don't necessarily buy the party line anymore. So shul is still a place they go because it's their chevra.
Yeah, Cindy, thanks for that. And, I certainly have critiques and praises of every denomination, which is beyond the scope of this conversation. But while the synagogue infrastructure is struggling in non-Orthodoxy, Orthodox synagogues are booming. I mean, like hard to get a seat. And you're right. A lot of those people attending are looking for community. They're not theologically Orthodox. They're not halakhically strictly observant. And this is really good in particular for singles. Singles, Upper West Side, for example, really anywhere in the country, they go to Chabad. Or on campus, you want to meet somebody, you go to Chabad, you go to an Orthodox synagogue, because there's going to be dozens and dozens of young professionals. Everyone's not going to be over 70. And that social orthodoxy, is a very real phenomenon. And where people can meet each other and connect, and find partners, whether or not they, kind of toe the line of that. In fact, I know a lot of people out here in Phoenix. One of the main places they can meet other young people is through spaces like that. Cindy. So thanks for that. Okay, Stan, over to you.
Yeah, I think we're taught that Shabbat is a difference between the holy and the profane, using Havdalah. So it has to be different than the rest of the week. And now that I'm kind of retired, it's kind of the same a little bit. But one thing that differentiates it is when our kids grew up, we always blessed them at every Shabbat dinner. Now that our kids have moved on, we still say the blessing for children, even though they're not at home with us. So we try to have that day special. We do as much as we can. But I think the thing is that it should be different than any other day of the week. And when it ends on Saturday night, then you do different things. So you try to observe it in your own way. But if you want to go to shul, as Cheryl said, we go to shul every week. You don't go to shul, you still celebrate Shabbat. And we also live in an era too. If you don't want to go to shul, just turn on one of the great synagogues in the country on Zoom, and you could see terrific services.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, for those who are looking more for the service experience rather than the social experience, or for whatever reason that's all they can access, you can now tap into the best services in the world. So that some people bemoan that because they feel that that's hurting local synagogues, and other people celebrate that because it means that people can get the experience they want. So picking up on what you said there, Kodesh and Chol, between the holy and the mundane, I just was reading something, someone who was writing about just war ethics, and as they were relating to the priorities, if you look at the last bracha of Havdalah, right, of course, not of course, but we start with Berei Pri Hagafen, and then we go to Berei Minei Vesamim, we go to spices, and then we go to Berei Morei Ha'esh on the candle. But then the last bracha says, Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'Chol, the separating between the holy and the mundane, ben or lachoshech, between light and dark, and then it says ben Yisrael amim, a difference between people, and then ben yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yimei hamaseh, between the seventh day and the other days. And they were saying there that part of our ability to distinguish means placing people above Shabbat itself, which is to say, going back to the question of the vet and the question of doctors and the question of soldiers, that human life, of course, takes precedence over Shabbat, and in countless ways, and that's partially reflected in here in the Havdalah, in learning how to be mavdil, how to just distinguish. Part of that distinguishing is between humans, and then between days of the week, and that's part of that enterprise of holy and mundane. So thank you, Stan. Yeah, very interesting. David, hi, David. Yes,
Hi.
please.
So I've been interested in the ratio between work days and Shabbat. So 6-1, and is that because we value creation, we value tikkun olam, we value it's important. If all you did was Shabbat for the rest of your life, just resting, you need a balance to lead a fully human life. Just a thought.
Yeah, very nice.
And why more work than Shabbat? So I too am retired. So the challenge in retirement is to find what are those creative things. What is the work that I want to do, even though I'm not working? And that's 6/7 of a happy existence, and then you have Shabbat. So it's a challenge too, to work and then to have Shabbat.
Right. Very nice. Yeah, you could have imagined it saying 3 days a week is Shabbat and 4 days a week is work. Or it could have said every day you work and every night you may not work, or something. Actually, some nights when I'm like falling asleep at my laptop, I like to think of the fact that in every night of creation, the work of creation was not done, but God said, I got to go to sleep. Right? I got to go to sleep, even though the job's not done yet. Right? So I say, all right, I got a lot to do. I got 85 more emails, but if God went to sleep, then most certainly I should go to sleep. Right? So, but yeah, the construction of the 7-day week is a biblical invention. Actually, I'm not sure if scholars suggest there's anything earlier. If there is something earlier than the Torah, but I'm pretty sure the Torah is the beginning of the 7-day week. But I'm not sure. Actually, I want to check that. Just because some of the things we think of as starting with Jews actually don't start with Jews. The most obvious example and surprising example, if you haven't heard it yet, is the bris milah. People think, Abraham circumcised himself, the first Jew. Boom, there's the birth of circumcision. Circumcisions were happening pre-biblical, which is startling. But anyways, the 7-day work week, of course, the month is connected to the lunar calendar and the year is connected to the solar calendar. But the 7-day week is not connected to anything. It's a biblical construction. And why did it create the 7? That's very interesting. And there's a lot of mystics that engage with that. 7 being the natural order and 8 being the supernatural, once going to the bris being on the 8th. But you're right. It's a very interesting question, David, and how in different times of our life, 6 and 1 might feel right, and other times it might feel wrong. And it might feel like we need more the other way. So thanks for that, David. Very interesting.
I think that at least in Phoenix, our urban planning and the large distances between things makes traditional Shabbat observance very difficult if you want to do anything together, because people don't live on top of each other and in community the same way we used to.
Very interesting. Yes. Yeah, it's such an interesting point. And what community looks like to us, given our the how spread out we are and the development of our cities, and why do we move where we move, and why do we live on the streets we live on? This is probably not true anymore. About 10 years ago, when I was talking with someone who knocks on doors for political campaigns, they actually talked about how more than it being county-based, that the politics shifts street by street relatively predictably. That people tend to live on the same street, which was never a factor in how I kind of looked at what house to buy. I mean, 10 years ago, you didn't see as many political flags as you do now, which I wish there was less of those, at least where I live. But people actually do tend to live on the streets of people politically aligned with them, not just the neighborhoods. Anyways, yeah, it's a really interesting point. And I think more and more Hasidic groups are going to start doing what one Hasidic group started doing out here in Arizona. Someone might remember the name of the town. I'm forgetting it at the moment. But they started a community in the middle of nowhere out here. And why would you pay the prices of Brooklyn if you want to be a totally insular community anyways, right? Go find a little piece of land in Arizona nobody lives, bring 100 families, and for a dirt price, you can start a whole new community, and like this community did out here. And this whole kibbutz idea, is something that's worth thinking about. I mean, the experiment, imagine starting communities like that. On the other hand, people think of their communities as being more than just Jewish these days, and they want to be in broader communities as well. Okay, friends, time for maybe one more comment.
I was curious who was circumcising pre-biblically.
Who was doing that? Let me get back to you, because I have a sense, but I want to give you something more exacting. Just a quick Google search is telling me, and which I would want to look much deeper than this, that some suggest it exists in Africa for more than 9,000 years, that it dates back that far. Central and East Africa. Prior to 300 CE, male circumcision, which is a cultural practice that is part of male initiations, is estimated to have existed in Africa for more than 9,000 years. What's the source on that? That is from Ahmed Saidi, Christian Ahmed Saidi, Family and Encyclopedia from Ancient Times to the Present. So anyways, I'm going to look into that more. But it's a fascinating idea that it may be that the Bible actually was influenced by surrounding society on that, as opposed to the common explanation that it kind of originated as a form of Jewish self-sacrifice. So anyways, more on that. And I think that's true with a number of ideas. Actually, interesting enough, part of what we're exploring in this 10-part series is some of these ideas, or ideas that truly originate with Jews, such as Shabbat. Others are ones that may have had some existing, or Tselem Elohim. We're going to look at Tselem Elohim. That is a biblical idea. The notion that every human being is created in the image of God is completely a Jewish idea in its origins. Other ideas may have had some other earlier influence, but Jews kind of took it to a new level or enhanced it. But you will not see one of our 10 being circumcision. I'm not anti-circumcision. I'm not joining the anti-circumcision movements, but I also don't think it's in the top 100 best Jewish ideas. I think Jews would have been all right had we not had such an institution. But I do consistently write against female genital cutting. But I do have some anti-circumcision people who have me as enemy number one because I write those articles, but still defend circumcision for men. So that conversation for another day. All right, wonderful to see you all. I hope you all have a blessed day and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much.